I'm going to just put up a quick slideshow as we're talking through, just so you have different visuals. Can everyone see that? Let me know if you cannot.
I see it.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was going to look for the present thing, and let's get it going. Okay, Sharon, anything else you want to add before we jump on in?
No, I think I would like to simply tell everybody who the panelists are, and then you can go ahead. We have Pam Dempsey, of course, from the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting, and she is the executive director. We have Celeste Lecompte, who's the vice president of business development for Pro Publica. Tom Laskaway, the executive director of the Food and Environment Reporting Network, or FERN, and Allison Go, who's the chief strategy officer at Chalkbeat.
Well, thank you.
Pam, why don't you go ahead?
Definitely. So we're just going to dive in. We're just going to give you a kind of a rundown of what.
Pam, we can't hear you, or at least I can't.
Anybody else hear me or no?
No, you're back.
That's good.
Okay, I'll slow down. I'm sorry. I get excited and I talk too fast. But anyway, I'll stop talking. Tom, do you want to talk about your thing?
Sure, I'll dive right in. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Pam and Sharon for inviting me. So I'm going to try to give a quick overview of the product that is the subject for us at Fern. And Pam, cut me off if I feel like I'm going too long at this point. I know so I'm just going to do a brief overview that will hopefully generate questions. I'm not going to try to cover every element here, and then we can have a conversation as we hear from everyone else. So I'm here to really highlight our paid subscription product called Fern's Ag Insider. Fern is we're a national subject-specific newsroom, so we do food and agriculture and environmental health issues. Most of our work is long-form, investigative, in-depth reporting in partnership with other news outlets that we distribute and post to our website for free. But we also have a policy-focused news service that is subscription-based that we launched as a way to generate additional revenue. So that service, called Fern's Ag Insider, is focused on federal and state legislative and regulatory issues surrounding food and ag, primarily aimed at an audience of policymakers, government officials, advocates, food industry executives. It includes daily policy reporting, analysis, some aggregation by our editor, Chuck Abbott, who's a longtime agriculture reporter, as well as our associate editor and staff writer, Leah Douglas, along with a range of freelancers. So for a fee, you get access to a paywalled mini site where all the reporting lives. It includes a full searchable archive. And then we also send out a free email newsletter every weekday, which has summaries of the full stories, and as well as that's where we put the aggregation. So we give the full aggregation that we do, that kind of roundup in the newsletter. The newsletter was actually the original product, which we launched in early 2014. It was free. We developed the audience over the course of about a year. And then in the fall of 2015, we relaunched it as a paid subscription product. We moved the content onto the site. So we now have hundreds of individual and corporate subscribers, a number of academic institutional subscribers, including NYU, Stanford, Harvard Law, Berkeley, Tufts, Yale, and Penn. And the newsletter audience is a few thousand people, and sort of independent. So obviously there's a much wider audience that's getting that newsletter than as a paid subscriber. We also have an exclusive editorial agreement for content with Meredith Publications for their agriculture.com site and their Successful Farming magazine, which are really some of the leading outlets for production agriculture. And then we will syndicate individual articles to outlets like Mother Jones and NPR. And we earn about $70,000 a year in subscription and editorial fees specifically from Ag Insider service. And those last two elements are definitely our greatest business success, that sort of academic market as well as that this editorial relationship. And I'm happy to talk about that in a little more detail if folks are interested. But we've also managed to turn the service into a pretty effective driver of coverage in our subject area. So it's very specific, very wonky. And that's part of, I think, the logic behind using it as a revenue driver for us. So we've broken news. We've had several stories matched by mainstream outlets, and we've even gotten that ultimate compliment in there, other people's reporting, the as first reported by Ferns Ag Insider. And I'd say our biggest challenge is sales and marketing. We don't have a staff for that. We're a very small operation. And so our growth has had really to be organic overall, with the exception of some paid advertising that we do, but it's social media ads, Google ads, and that's about it. And so this growth, the revenue growth, which has really been steady and gone from zero and grown over 5 years up to 70,000 is pretty significant for us. Well, I'm going to just leave it there and let other folks introduce their products.
Real quick, Tom, could you talk a little bit about that again for me to explain further the relationship between the content that you report for general audience and these news products? Like, is it the chicken, the egg? Like, which drives which?
Right. So, I mean, they developed in parallel. I mean, the organization was launched in 2010. The focus on that kind of long form reporting, and the essence of our model was to create exclusive relationships on a project basis for our stories so that they could reach an audience. We say that content is, quote, free, but of course we work with publishers, some of whom may have subscriptions or paywalls, but all of our long form content, again, lives on the website and is accessible for free. Anyone who comes in over the transom can read all of our long form reporting. And what we realized is there was a market for this very wonky focused work on legislative issues, regulatory issues. A lot of it is commodity. Some of it is classic commodities reporting. And for that market, we felt like this was as close as we could come to a business intelligence product, and we could justify charging a specific subscription for that content because most of our work has a general news audience, and we didn't feel like we were going to be in a position, certainly based on how we conceived of the organization and the collaborative nature of it, to ever charge for that. I mean, our obvious goal is to get that information to as wide an audience as possible. But when we found we had something that we thought had real value to a business audience, that could be something that we would leverage with for revenue. We lost your audio again, Pam.
No, I'm
okay. You're not talking.
All right, Celeste, let's talk about you.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Celeste Lecompte, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Pro Publica. And a lot of what I have to say actually echoes a ton of what you just heard about Fern's work. But I want to talk about the Pro Publica Datastore. So Pro Publica, we're an investigative nonprofit newsroom. We publish quite a lot of long-form, in-depth reporting, and a huge amount of our work, especially historically, has been based on analysis of very large data sets in the healthcare space, in the criminal justice space, around technology, you name it. We do a ton of work with data sets. In a lot of cases, we are taking public data that's been released by some kind of an agency or an entity and cleaning it up and putting it into our reporting and using it to sort of drive the analysis. But in a lot of cases, we are actually creating data sets out of things that are not structured data in the past. Or we're taking a bunch of different data sets and combining them together and doing a lot of analysis in order to tell a story that people might not already know. So over the years, we have tried a variety of ways to take the data behind our reporting and make it available to the public and to a bunch of different parts of the audience who might have need for it, whether it's other journalists, whether it is law enforcement agencies that want to take action based on our reporting, or whatever that might be. And so we have created little download buttons on graphics or released all kinds of things that go out. In 2014, our data and our news apps team started to produce not only big graphic databases where you could search through the data yourself, look up your doctor, look up your congressperson, but they started to create a thing that they called a data store at the time, and it was just a sort of simple listing of the data in our reporting. You could, most of the time there was just a button that told you could either download it from the source or download it from us. And in some cases you could download a PDF, which you were then supposed to fax in order to purchase some of the most valuable cleaned data. I joined the company in 2015 and thought that there was a lot of really interesting potential here because there are data sets where we've produced this really ambitious reporting story and really told our piece of it. And we've created infographics where the individual members of the public can look up the thing that matters to them, finding a good doctor, understanding what their congressional representatives' voting records have been, things like this. But there's also a lot of potential commercial value that wasn't necessarily captured by the publication of our journalism alone, that seemed like we could push harder on that. And maybe downloading and filling out a PDF wasn't the easiest way for people to access it. So we relaunched the data store in 2016 with more tools to help us kind of manage and grow the sales on that. So instead of downloading a PDF, you filled out some information on the website, and then I started calling customers and learning more about what they needed. That was a really helpful set of conversations, and we doubled our sales over the course of that year, and we're able to use that insight to build now what we have is an online data sales platform. So when our reporters are publishing something with a data set, they are supposed to, and mostly they do, send me an email with information about the data set, a link to it, documentation about it, and we assess whether it has any real commercial value. We also do this in partnership with other newsrooms that we co-publish stories with, or with just other newsrooms in the landscape who have a smaller number of data sets that they think have commercial potential. The overall scope of this is that we now have, 6 partner newsrooms that we sell data for or have co-produced reporting with, including the Chicago Tribune and the New York Daily News. But we also sell data sets on behalf of the Associated Press and New Jersey Advance and the Reading Eagle and IRE NICAR. We have, since 2016, sold more than $350,000 worth of data. In the last 18 months, we have made about $16,000 for our partners off of the sales of our data. So it's not huge. We average about $75,000 a year. But given that it's all online, we have a platform that's in place and it's based directly off of things that we're already producing in our reporting, it's a pretty nice little additional benefit for us. I actually think that, much like Tom was just saying, there's plenty of additional potential on the revenue side, but certainly sales and marketing continues to be a challenge. We are not a newsroom that is set up to do sales and marketing, and I think that is a great thing to think about as you are building these kind of projects. I used to give this talk about sort of how to think about taking things in your newsroom and turning them into commercial products. And one of the kind of metaphors that I always come back to in thinking about this is that I was a technology reporter, and I was traveling and visited a factory in China once. And there was a company that was making go-karts. That's why we were there. We were interested in their motor, the people I was reporting on. And you went to their showroom and there were all these go-karts that were, big, little, small, painted pink for princessy things and like big industrial bachelor party in Vegas style go-kart crazy things. But there were also a whole lot of trampolines in the room. And I was like, that seems weird. Like, why would you make trampolines in this kind of an operation? And then when we went onto the factory floor, what you realized was that in order to make a go-kart and in order to make a trampoline, you use almost all of the same equipment. You use big metal pipes that you have machines that can bend them into the crazy shapes that you need. You attach some springs to them. You have a powder coating area that paints them into the different colors that you want. But then the thing that I hadn't really thought about in that moment and has become more clear to me over time is that the other thing that they had is that these are both recreational products. And so they already had a sales and marketing operation that was really geared up to sell to the particular kinds of suppliers in the US and around the world that had customers for trampolines in addition to their go-karts. And I think that's a really important thing to think about, is that if you're going to do this kind of work, what is the lift for you in terms of reaching the customers that you have? Like, how many of them are already in your audience and will know about this through the kind of organic web-based methods that we use in terms of like optimizing our pages for SEO, linking to them in our stories. That's pretty much all we do. We don't do advertising. We don't do a lot of outbound sales. And so that sort of limits the potential size of the revenue from it for us. And then also the products that you have make a big difference there as well, in terms of, if you're using something in your underlying reporting, is it something that's a kind of one and done project, or is it something that you're going to be doing over a long period of time? And how does that affect the kind of customer that you can attract? Is it something that people are going to need continuously? Is it something that you can build a relationship with them through a sale of one thing, and then you will have other things that are kind of like that? And I think that's sort of the difference between like the data store and a more subscription-based product. Some of our data sets are things that we keep up to date, but we run on a newsroom schedule and not on a commercial schedule. And so thinking about what are the demands of commercial users of our data, they want them, on the 1st of the month or on June 1st every year. And I can't promise that, because news doesn't work that way for us. So I think it's been a really great business, but I think that there are a lot of really great questions to ask about what is the life cycle of your product? Who are the customers? How are you going to reach them? And what is the additional revenue going to do for your operation? And will it feed back into your journalism? So I will stop there, because I know we don't have a ton of time and I've talked a lot, but happy to talk more about any of the details.
Real quick before you do quit. So this also, we're talking a little bit about passive income, right? So once you're can you just talk 2 seconds on that? So it's up there and it's going to be making money, right?
Yep. At first, because we had this kind of consultative sales process where I had to get on the phone with everybody who wanted to buy a data set, it was not passive, and it was not, the ratio was, $100,000 in a year, but a huge chunk of my time. So that wasn't great. And now it's $75,000 a year and none of my time, other than like making a web page every 2 months or something. And so that is much better. Plus, because we now have this sort of channel where we're able to meet some of our kind of true fans, we also do a lot of email acquisition inside that platform. And so in addition to sort of passive revenue, which is really great, we're also building relationships with sort of the people who are most likely to become donors or big consumers of Pro Publica's work in a high impact way. And I did a little bit of poking at our data this morning just to sort of see what that looked like. And in the last year, I think we have about $10,000 in directly attributable donations to people who came to us from the data store for the first time. I'm sure that that is a very cursory analysis, and there's probably many more interesting things to say there, but it's passive revenue and also a good relationship builder.
And I'm sorry, I meant to define passive for those who may not know. Could you do that real quick? I'll move on to Allison.
Sure. I mean, the way I would think about it is that it's something that we have set up, and we don't have to constantly sort of maintain it as a product. It sits there and generates revenue off of the back of work that we were already doing without us needing to do a ton of additional like labor and sales and all of those things.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Allison. So Allison, go with Chalkbeat, and let me advance.
Hi. Here. It's in the wrong room for a while, so.
Hey, Allison. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. So not really sure what background was given at the beginning, so I'm going to assume none, just because just to quickly go over what Chalkbeat does and a little bit more about the project that we're featuring here. So Chalkbeat is a national network of local news sites focused on education. So we have 7 locales, New York, Newark, Detroit, Chicago, Denver, Indianapolis, and Memphis, and we basically provide education beat reporting in those cities, covering what your education beat reporter probably would have covered at the legacy newspaper in that city, but knowing how things are in the world right now, that much of that is no longer being covered. So Chalkbeat, with our nonprofit model, comes in and makes sure that that is provided for the communities. The thing that makes Chalkbeat really unique is that while the reporting that we offer is very, let's say, traditional in many ways, it's not as if we are doing anything that has never been done before. We're just making sure it exists. The fact that we are linked together in this network and we have a topical focus provides us a lot of interesting earned revenue opportunities. And this particular one is a very recent one, and something that's like kind of a neat, agile, nimble thing that we did recently, but I think it speaks well to kind of how we approach earned revenue in general. So the earned revenue is still a relatively small amount of our total pie. 85% of our revenue comes from philanthropy still, but the next biggest slice of the pie is earned revenue, and most of it comes from sponsorships, right? That's still the big bucket here, just selling ads right on our site and actually on our newsletters, right? But we have two other revenue sources that are fairly powerful here. So one is job postings. So education professionals will use us to post. So the school districts will post on our site for new teacher jobs, principal jobs, administrator jobs. And this is a pretty good revenue source for us. We charge some upwards of like $245 for a package of job listings, and people might buy a bulk package, that kind of thing. So that's a decent amount of revenue. And then the other category here is what we call event listings. So we are kind of our newsletter is a clearinghouse for information on local education happenings. And we have a pretty niche audience of teachers and parents who read us. And so people who are trying to reach those audiences to get you to come to some event, whether it's a local community event or some sort of professional development event, use our newsletter to get access to those eyeballs, right? And what's interesting here is we at first had all of that was free. We didn't charge anyone for that. It was we considered it like a community service as part of our engagement journalism. But what we did is started charging for paid events. So if it was a free event, like a mommy group doing some sort of get together, we wouldn't charge for that. But if it was a conference that was receiving money to host the event, we would then charge them for that posting. And we do this through Typeform, and then there's like a auto magical way it ends up on the site, and it gets rerouted to whichever locale it's most relevant to. And it's like this thing that we set up that is, it's not like a huge amount of money, but it's like nice to have. And it's basically, once it's set up, it's free money. And there's not that much maintenance on it. So I think that's kind of the foundation of our earned revenue strategy, which is we've put in place a couple tools that work really well. They're auto magical. And then when we have interesting opportunities come our way, and there's COVID-related chaos that has happened, has actually presented us with ways to earn revenue off of things that are happening in the world, and it's adjacent to coverage that we have. So that brings me to the summer camp example here. So this is like a really interesting kind of interplay between our editorial team and our earned revenue team. We have basically, one of the stories within education and local education is like, what am I going to do with my children during the summer? Normally I would ship them off to day camps and then go to work, and that is a thing. But we all know that is not possible with COVID. And that was like a through line in our stories across multiple locations. And our earned revenue basically saw that and said, there's actually this interesting opportunity here where all these day camps, which are highly localized actually, are now turning themselves into national day camps because they're all, much like this conference, remote and available to multiple students. So the possible audience for these day camps has grown from like the Detroit area, let's say, to, if I have like a STEM camp, anyone can actually attend it. It doesn't even matter where you are. And so now these people are looking for a national audience that they never would have thought to try to find before. So with that insight, we're like, let's scrap together a summer camp listing and see how much money we can make from this. And this was literally 3 weeks ago. So when I say recent, very recent. And so the setup here was using the same form and idea from the event listings that we do, these local ones. We use the exact same setup, put up a type form, and force people to pay. If you want to be on this listing, you have to pay. And I think we charge $75 per posting. And we were able to spin something up in literally 10 minutes. Put it up on the site, blast it out to our network, to the people who we think, both in our newsletters themselves, but also people we have in our internal marketing lists. And within 2 weeks, we were able to generate 23 camp listings nationally, and which is a roughly like $1,600 in revenue based on what is effectively like 10 minutes of work on setup, and then maybe 15 minutes every other day to kind of update the page that has the summer camp listings on it. So I think like this is not like a game-changing amount of money, but it's also like, I think, indicative of kind of an agile approach to like looking at opportunities and squeezing dollars out of every news plug that is happening as well. And this can live alongside much of our content, our newsy content about summer camps, but this is like a paid partnership for like news you can use, right? Because I think also parents will find great value and utility out of this product. So that's kind of the story of what this is. I think it's, for us, a great learning that if you have the infrastructure ready, you can try interesting things very quickly. And I think this one was very successful, and I'm sure that more opportunities will present themselves and we'll be able to kind of capitalize on those. So
Great, Allison, thank you so much. To just kind of reiterate a little bit, so you guys seeing sort of an opportunity within your own reporting to maybe spin off then this revenue chance, right? And it's not a heavy lift on your end, and it sounds like it's been successful so far.
Yep. Yes, correct.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'll move really quickly to mine, and then we'll open them to questions as we're running a little bit out of time. So basically, much like, almost like time frame that Allison just talked about, we were covering a trial in Missouri between an agribusiness company, Monsanto, and a peach farmer. And the coverage itself, we were the only media outlet there every single day for 3 weeks. There was a lot of expense with that. So to raise money, we offered these paid newsletters that would give behind the scenes beyond our reporting. So we called these, sort of reporters' notebooks, but we were asking for $50 for somebody who might want that. And every single night we would write the story, get that published, and then the reporter wrote an additional amount of work to just sort of give tidbits. Like, for example, the judge in the case happened to be related to Rush Limbaugh, to also more serious things that there were some court documents that were all under seal but presented in court. We highlighted those. This was a very specific, like time-specific, subject-specific revenue product. We raised just at about $1,000 for it, but it still went to offset some of the costs related to this. And it was a little bit of a heavy lift. It took maybe an additional half an hour every night to get the newsletters out, to get them to the list, and then to continue to promote that. Additionally, from all of this coverage, we built out an anthology of all of our stories in one spot, including materials from the lawsuit that we're selling for $25 on our site. So that's been more slow growth. We talked about passive income earlier. This was sort of a one and done. But still, it was our revenue source is not that big. We do, as Allison mentioned, rely a lot on foundations and kind of the slow build with more individual giving. And this, as even Celeste mentioned, kind of was a gateway to get more support. In fact, following this and during a spring fundraiser, we were able to raise $6,000 in individual donations, some of that came from the newsletter subscribers. So it was, I think, definitely worth our time and something we would do again. But it was an opportunity at the moment. Let's take all this reporting. We know people won't necessarily read, 20 pages on our site, but break it out in chunkable bits for those who are more hardcore on this issue. I'm going to stop sharing there, and we have some time for questions. So ask away. And thank you so much for your time.
So I have a couple questions that are people have asked so far. Jenny is asking to all of the speakers or any of the speakers, how have you balanced user research and having your audience give you feedback about what they need? So for example, putting something inexpensive out there and then testing it.
I had started to write a reply in the chat and then was like, I want to hear what's happening and maybe we will talk about these. So thanks. I think we have done a little bit of both. And I would say it depends a little bit on what kinds of resources that you have to invest in your product development. overall and as an organization. So at ProPublica, when I was starting, I wanted to work with materials that we had sort of already laying around the room, and not trying to create something new out of whole cloth for our audience. And so I wanted to say, what kind of value has been left on the cutting room floor of our existing work, and how can we monetize that? So I didn't want to launch a new business line for our existing customers. I wanted to take something that we already had and see if I could build a new customer base for it. And so then once I did that, that was like the sort of put something out and test it. So we had this like really inexpensive, small web portal for basic sales flow. Then we were able to learn more about who those customers would be, learn more about their needs, what their price points were, actually do that kind of user testing, and then create a slightly more robust website for that. So I think in a commercial newsroom, you might actually reverse those things. But for the particular situation that we were in around the resources we had to invest up front in product development, it made sense to go that direction.
Yeah, I think for us, it's literally a linear relationship between how much work investment we're going to need to put into it and how much research we're going to do before we do that. So for these, for instance, the fact that we already had Typeform set up and we've done a version of this with other products made it a no-brainer to just do this and throw it out into the world and see what happens. The other interesting thing, I didn't even mention this, was the summer camp guide, like job postings themselves create revenue, but it actually also created buzz with potential sponsors who want to actually sponsor the guide. So like, I think that's actually where we're going to make a lot more money, is not so much the individual postings, but the opportunity to send a blast out and say something interesting, allow people to reach out to us and then, think through like, okay, here's another way we can sponsor you. So that's another like win that we're kind of laying down the last details of the deals right now. But we have, like in the works at Chalkbee, we have something much bigger, thinking about the teacher audience, 7 million educators in America, and like, can we build out a pure revenue, like earned revenue product for that audience? And that is going to go through fairly extensive research before we put down any pixels, because we don't even know exactly what we want to do. And so that kind of thinking will require more user research up front. But something like Typeform is already set up, just throw it out there, like zero research. Just put it out in the world.
Thank you, Allison.
Quick
Tom.
question.
Yeah, so we had sort of a really interesting genesis, because the original inspiration for Ag Insider was a new email blast that Chuck Abbott, who at the time was at Reuters, would send out to 100-something other reporters, just telling them what he had on his radar. And it was sort of his own sort of curation, personal curation, of what the important stories were and interesting stories were in his area. And he was doing this throughout his tenure at Reuters, as a commodities reporter there. And he had approached Reuters while he was there about doing something with it, and they had zero interest in it. They didn't see any value. Now, of course, Reuters is a massive organization. But when he ultimately took a buyout, and he still continued, as he was working as a freelancer, he continued to do that, to do that email blast. And we actually saw it and approached him about formalizing it, turning it into a newsletter. So he was already had something where there was this small audience that absolutely loved it. So we had some feedback to work with. And then as we expanded and built the product first initially as a newsletter, we could see from the responses we were getting what was working, what was more popular, and that informed our decision as we turned it into a full-fledged news service. Now, there's nothing passive about what we're doing on this. I mean, we were building a news product. We were not a newsroom in a traditional sense, and we had to come a little closer to that form in order to produce this. So we had to create a subscription system within our WordPress site, and we had to create a workflow and do all these things to feed this beast that we created. But now we have all the feedback that we get from traditional analytics to know what's working and what's not. We haven't done any real survey research at this point, because we just get so much of the feedback within the product itself.
And I do want to jump in on this too. For us, this really was the brainchild of Brant Houston, who works closely with us on our coverage and on our business side. And as we were discussing this project that was coming up, he said, hey, why don't you do a paid newsletter? So sort of beyond for those who really have an interest in this. And we were able to jump on it, work with the reporter. We did sort of put it out there, I think, relatively inexpensively using MailChimp, and then doing testing and just sort of getting feedback from that. We had never done a paid newsletter. I consider it successful because we did have people sign up for it, and we got some good feedback from those who subscribed.
There's a question for Pam here from Matt. How did you solicit payments and collect them on the reporter notebooks for that project?
So we used our existing PayPal account and just did a tag on that so people could just click to it, sign up for it using MailChimp. And then we put it out on social media, we put it out on our website, and we put it out on our usual daily website, weekly newsletters as well. We had a little bit of longevity, I think, because this was going over 3 weeks, but really within a week to 10 days, we had our max subscribers on it, and then we're able to also convert them to daily or to weekly subscribers and ongoing. So it's just tools that we used already.
Thank you. So anybody who has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. In the meantime, I had a question just for the group, and this might not apply specifically to Celeste, but maybe it does for the rest of you. Are you continually thinking of ways to raise revenue? You're all running, news operations and have a lot of responsibilities. I guess I should ask, is your newsroom, is that a continual focus for you?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just real quick, definitely. I mean, I think we're all, as nonprofit newsrooms, right, we're all looking for ways to diversify our pot. And so we are looking at ways of I want to say it's definitely, journalism is our focus, but then as Celeste said, what are about the things that end up on the cutting room floor? And then how do you leverage that into potential news products without something that's not going to completely tap you out or draw away from the work that you're originally doing? Allison, you were going to pipe up?
Yeah. So for us, when I hear the term newsroom, so we Chalkbeat is about 65 people, 40 plus of them are newsrooms, so everything from reporters to editors, but also audience folks, and then like 20 are business side and kind of executive, like trying to keep track of everything. And to be clear, like we actually do not ask our newsroom people to be thinking about revenue opportunities actively, but there are certain key people at the leadership level, everything from bureau chiefs to managing editors, who it is their responsibility to think about, like, what are the things that are special that are happening, and then flag them to a relevant revenue person who can then be the person who's then going to think through the ideas and be reactive and possibly find those sponsors or possibly turn it into kind of like a product that can earn revenue. So I don't know if this is exactly the question, but it is something like I think we have built over time, is the communication between the two sides to make sure those opportunities, because we've missed opportunities in the past, certainly, to have found a great sponsor for an event or a product that we almost certainly could have gotten something if we had advance notice. And so there are definitely people in the newsroom who know to think about these things, and they don't have to come up with the idea, but they have to at minimum flag it, and it is considered a miss if that doesn't get flagged, and it could have been a revenue opportunity. But I think it's not a process per se, it's like a culture, or it's like just a thing that is like embedded in the way we talk to each other. Maybe the process part is newsroom folks are like guest stars at revenue meetings occasionally, and there's actually a rotating schedule where one of the editors will join the revenue team meetings and they'll get to listen but also share what's going on. I think that's a good habit there. So then it just, as new things come up, they can be flagged very casually via Slack, let's say. But I think that there's like a top-down culture here where you want to be talking about these things all the time.
Does anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I also saw a kind of semi-related question early in the chat about kind of a critical mass for a product when you want to try to launch something in terms of audience and so on. And so for us, it's all about sales and trying to market the product. And I think Pam and I, it sounds like we're the smallest the four of us, we're the smallest organizations, and if I could have a dedicated person who truly owned Ag Insider within the organization, who could be its real evangelist, that would be a huge benefit for the service, because as it is now, there are a couple of us who wear these hats at varying points. And it's not something that I can dedicate all or even a significant amount of my time to, in terms of coming up with, ways to leverage the product and get more revenue from it. Like, I think the revenue potential for it is much bigger than what we're able to exploit right now, just purely on the basis of headcount. At the same time, an ongoing question for us is, how big does it need to be to capitalize on the product? And I've been surprised that we've been able to generate as much revenue out of it as we have, based on this relatively small audience. And I think for newsrooms that have any kind of business intelligence style information that flows out of their reporting, that is definitely the best sort of premium information to work out of. I mean, we're not talking about none of us here are talking about trying to charge for our content in any kind of membership system or a subscription system like Mother Jones has with the magazine. I mean, that's obviously a business model. That's not one that we're exploring. This is really about taking a focused product and trying to gain some additional revenue out of it. And so it can be very hard to make that determination of, like, what's big enough, what's a big enough audience to try to raise revenue against. You just have to balance what you can charge, what your conversion is ultimately going to be. Like, I think off of our original newsletter audience, we converted something like 10% of the newsletter audience to paid subscribers. And
So
that was
Tom,
enough for us to justify launching.
yeah, that's great. Great information. Thank you. I wondered if Celeste has a few words to say. We are running right up against our deadline in about 3 minutes, but why don't you bring us home?
I started my career as a reporter and was on the newsroom side, but always in a kind of indie media space. So we were always kind of hungry for money. And in order to keep my job, I sort of had my radar open for it. But I think that one of the things that I see really as a positive shift in terms of the revenue opportunities in newsrooms right now is that newsrooms increasingly have a kind of audience focus that reporters have their heads around. Like, who is this for? And like, who is the audience for our journalism, and how do we work with them, and what do they need, and what do they care about? And I think as reporters think about those things and want to see what happens with their work in the world beyond publishing a story, they're more attuned to the opportunities that exist that can generate revenue. I mean, Charlie Ornstein, our healthcare reporter, is the one who sort of has pushed a lot of our like cool data-driven projects. And he's always coming to me and being like, have you tried marketing to this audience? Because, I know that they would be really interested in using it. And because he just sort of knows the field of people that he, is reporting with and on and about, and has a good sense of that beat and that landscape. And so reporters, even if they're not thinking about revenue, have a really good sense of sort of the customers in the audience if they have that kind of a newsroom focus. And I think as many newsrooms are trying to move in that direction, that's a really good opportunity for the revenue folks.
Yeah, and I would close, just like double down on that, which is that I'm pleasantly surprised when our reporters are all in on the revenue game too. And I think there's maybe it's not a myth elsewhere, but I find it to be a myth within Chalkbeat that they're completely allergic to the idea of thinking about revenue, because they're not, because we're all in it together. They know that we need to make money for this whole operation to keep going, and so I found openness to it. It's not rejected out of hand. It's just more like about time, and I think that's a really positive trend in the kind of collaboration between newsrooms and the revenue teams.
Thank you. I just want to give Pam a moment to say a few words, and then I'll send you off to your next meeting.
Great. Everybody, just thank you for joining us. Definitely thank you, Celeste, Tom, and Allison, for some great, I think, examples of how you could potentially make this work. Obviously, there are challenges to this, but I think these are just good examples of what can go. Feel free to reach out to any of us with any additional questions. Thanks to Sharon and Chip for keeping us floating. And thanks again for your time, everybody. We appreciate you joining us.